Go.
Welcome to the July 2009 San Francisco Bay Arbortext PTC user meeting. With us today we have Ben Martin from Flatirons. Ben is a recognized expert in write once and reuse content management strategies. He's an authority in the reuse of information across multiple languages. He's the Director of Business Architecture at Flatirons. He's a consulting and systems integration firm. They specialize in XML-based publishing and content management solutions. Ben is a former Vice President of the Global Content Management team for J.D. Edwards and has over 20 years industry experience. Ben, welcome to the user group.
Hey, this is great, and I know we're intimate today, so I offer up for anyone to interrupt me or elaborate in any area or add your own thoughts and comments. I'm trying to pull together, I think, what I'm calling a globalization fitness program that might be a little tongue-in-cheek and a lot of fun, and then take off on the exercise We Fit world, and to kind of find parallelisms in the globalization world and see if there might be some fun and humor, but at the same time deliver a message and also maybe benchmark against what a globally fit organization is. So I welcome your feedback. You're my first group to test drive this on. And my first slides were really just about Flatirons and myself, so I think that's already happened, so don't panic. It's not an infomercial, but Flatirons is in all aspects of the content technology space. We have quite a few lines of business, from high-tech manufacturing, education and publishing, aerospace transportation, marketing, media, and entertainment. We also have a pretty strong footprint in the government side and work with a lot of the government entities on both their air traffic control areas and their content management needs. And we do a lot in the XML thought leadership area. From all these different committees are ones that we have a presence in and either lead or participate in and care passionately about. And if you looked at our technology partners, these are the ones where we have specialized and have a particular expertise, and PTC is one of those areas where we have a long suit and have had a long relationship through the years. And I think I've already been introduced, so we don't need to go here. So I'm going to just start with looking at what are the drivers for globalization. And a lot of the growth opportunities today are now seen in the emerging markets. So much of the business has either tapped out or is shrinking in the U.S. markets. Companies are looking for ways to grow exponentially, but with the incremental investment, and sometimes that's through global websites and getting a foot in the regional door across the world. There's a lot of interdependent economies and trade patterns that are necessitating going to market in multiple venues, multiple languages, multiple cultures. And the competitive advantage is moving from just getting your product out there to really what's the customer experience, how solid is your brand in a particular country, and what's the process know-how that's being made available. And that's putting more onus on product companies to make sure that the customer experience is in the language of the client, or at least meets their expectations, and that their brand is culturally is consistent from the corporate point of view, but also it makes an impact regionally, and that the customer support network is in place. There's a lot of transition going from departmental silos to a kind of more of cross-functional views of global content. And this may be more a wish than what's really happening, but traditionally tech pubs has been quick or forced into figuring out how to localize content from requirements, product requirements or country requirements, but they kind of do one thing, marketing will do another, depending on the need for different levels of collateral and different levels of translating the website. And then training lags oftentimes behind and leaves it up to regions to figure out how to do it. I think that there's a sense that there's a better way of kind of orchestrating and looking at the enterprise view and having a cross-functional view. And anymore, there's so many of the companies' percentage of global business is inverting from 60 to 70% U.S. to now 55-60% is outside the U.S. So these are all pressures in the marketplace. Some of the barriers to success is oftentimes companies are not do not have an organized enterprise strategic body, meaning there's nobody at the top really looking across the enterprise and looking at what the investment and cost of investing in foreign markets or non-U.S. markets, and not really having an overarching language globalization strategy. A lot of times companies find themselves in a particular language business just because they had a very aggressive, enthusiastic sales guy who said, well, if I could get it in Arabic, I could sell 6 million, and suddenly they have Arabic, but they have no customers, or but no real strategy of how to be successful other than more knee-jerk reaction. It's a lot of poorly written source that results in poorly translated content. It doesn't get better when it goes into other languages, typically, unfortunately. There's a lot of disregard on the authoring side for language issues on graphics, UI, and layout dependent deliverables that do a lot of desktop publishing and where are trying to align everything to the page and the shape. There's some sometimes the proprietary view has a lot of gotchas. There's sloppy brand consistency across markets. There's kind of a pendulum swing that goes between centralizing brand and brand management and allowing the regions to do their own thing. And when the pendulum swings to regions doing their own thing, then there's a day when corporate wakes up and says, wow, this doesn't even look like our company that's in Brazil. It doesn't even resemble what we're about. So you see that tension that goes on in trying to centralize or figure out how to manage that brand. Content is often, at least from U.S.-centric companies, authored for American audience and not with a larger international audience. There's cumbersome manual handoffs that are oftentimes require making parallel versions of the content, but no way to really manage those versions other than folder management. So the workflow handoffs are very spreadsheet managed and not really system managed and a rigorous audit control. So content change gets lost. There's fiefdoms of content passively resisting collaboration, so everybody gets attached to how they've done it and are not often willing to. There's what they say and then what they do to resist having to, I guess, be absorbed into a more cross-functional approach to authoring. And many companies are CIOs or marketing VPs or whoever is responsible sometimes for centralized technology would like to say, well, we don't understand language issues. It's not our core competency. We leave that up to our localization vendor. These are all things that I think are barriers to success. Just not assuming that everybody knows, but probably this group already knows the difference between the four areas. Globalization is really the way of conceptualizing the product line for a global marketplace, more of the strategic. Internationalization is a process for making the product generalized so that it is easily translated and localized into different cultures. So internationalization is just something you do on the English side. Just make sure that you're using things that will are easier to carry into other markets and areas. Localization is adapting it to the software, product, website, to various markets and localities. Oftentimes that involves a translation, which means getting it into language. But you could certainly localize a website for Australia or England in terms of reflecting back their spelling, having better examples or regional specific examples that would be considered localizing that has nothing to do with translating and getting into language. The goals here would be wanting to, to keep in mind is improving the quality and brand integrity of content materials across markets, trying to be faster to market in a local language collateral and websites, to leverage and enhance the translation investment. So oftentimes you'll have regions that are spending on translation dollars. You have corporate that's doing translation dollar spend. You have tech pubs that's doing, or that's associated at least with localizing its content. And there's maybe a more effective way to do that, reducing cost on the authoring, publishing, and translation side. Thinking through methodologies that reduce the workload at the regional level so that they can focus on tweaking to their to their locale rather than reinventing or bootstrapping or starting from scratch, but that there's a methodology and a way to inherit intelligence and core content from corporate, but at the same time be able to customize that, and then looking for new revenue opportunities. Pace-wise, am I doing okay? You guys are with me so far?
Yeah, we're okay.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so if you looked at your body of content, would you say that your content body is obese and you don't care? Maybe the proverbial organization might say, it is what it is and we are what we are. It's the localization vendor's problem. I am just a victim of whatever each department needs to produce. I can't control what others do. Structured content's going to kill creativity. We are a bunch of cats and the regions need the freedom to do their own thing, and centralizing efforts requires too much compromise. So if you looked at the globalization fitness scale, this might be on the very low end. You might, maybe you're more with the streamlined content body and proud of it. Some of the things that might be said by your organization would be, we use content management to manage versions and optimize workflows. We use XML authoring to structure content, maximize reuse, and achieve multiple deliveries. We leverage a centralized term base that protects our brand, controls our authoring, and optimizes our translation memory translation processes. We leverage a centralized translation memory that is normalized by a linguist specialist who knows our business. We centralize website design and core content translation, enabling regions to localize as needed. We leverage an authoring QA tool to ensure consistency. We have a cross-functional strategy team determining market metrics, language and localization strategy, and content direction. Many of these bullets represent what I think a very globally fit organization is as it moves along the continuum of maturity. Maybe your corporate image and body of content is somewhere in the middle, where there are those in the organization who are just learning to spell XML and are thinking of using it, maybe in the tech pubs area. Sounds like this group is already well along that way, obviously, if you're the Arbortext PTC group. Vendors use translation memory, but not sure how that helps us. We have a glossary of terms online, which is always a good starting point or midpoint. We use a content management system in at least one department. We are in global markets and translate some of our stuff some of the time into 8 languages. We think we are doing okay, but we're not sure what industry best practices are out there. So if you were to try to benchmark and pull together how your organization might fare against what the globally fit organization is, some of the metrics that you might look at would be what your organization's size and revenue is, the percent revenue in foreign markets, non-U.S., for example. But if you were England, I mean, it would be non-England markets. Percent projected growth in foreign markets, what current global markets you're in, and number of languages, how much do you spend on translation, which is a point that most organizations don't really know what they're spending. Tech pubs and the extension into the localization effort for that is usually pretty visible to an organization, but how much is really buried in billable resources and regions that should be billable time that end up translating content. That's not their job, but they end up doing the training translation or website translations are oftentimes decentralized and buried into marketing budgets, but never itemized as translation dollars. So companies don't oftentimes really know what they're spending on translation and how much is really going to that when they start embarking on it. Looking at the amount of content in a target language versus the total amount of source. So there are would be a benchmark to look at the amount of product content, which would be all the supporting material, documentation, training, customer support, and help type content versus brand content, which would be more the marketing collateral web content. Obviously, they overlap, and maybe not obviously, but oftentimes there's an area of overlap between those two. Number of websites and language, how often the content, the products change, and amount of redundant chunks of content would all be metrics in terms of determining what your translation mass index is, if you will. Some of the industry benchmarks, and I want to start collecting more. I'm a little weak in this area at this point. I have some, and I haven't pulled them all together. But looking at how much should you be spending in context of total revenue, an industry standard has been that 5 to 10% of revenue would be equal to maybe your translation spend in large markets. In small markets, you would maybe spend even 10 to 20%. Looking at as you invest in markets that maybe you recover your cost in 3 years. Companies typically want to see an investment day one, but getting content and penetrating new markets is an investment. Looking at a revenue target that's based on a business case with accountability checkpoints. When I was in J.D. Edwards, many times we would dive into a language because of a business case that said there were, an opportunity of $5 million for us, and but at the end of the day, there was nobody. The guy who sold us on the $5 million was not around a year later, or nobody was asking, where's the $5 million? And so oftentimes we weren't optimized in the markets we went after just because we didn't have the checkpoints. Time to language, agile method can involve as short of time as 2-week cycles. This is where data really becomes valuable on the translation side when you have reusable componentized chunks that can, or topics that can stand alone in some sort of context. But that's a lot of churn, and a lot of the translation vendors will push back a little bit. They give us more down the road. But anyway, there are some of the globally fit organizations have worked out a process to keep that amount of time frame between authoring and translation to stay up with their agile development. And then website management also has the more and more of the global expectation that it will be whatever is pushed out in native language or in English will be available in languages in country simultaneously. So there's this malady of bloat where our organizations are discovering they have multiple ways of saying the same thing, similar but should be the same product chunks. So just a lot of almost the same but not. Repeated content but authored in different tools for different delivery channels. User-friendly content, I call it, loaded with repetitive information that could be skinny down. Creative writers oftentimes will want to vary the way they say the same thing just to keep the writing interesting, and there's a lot of repetitive information that is not the same but redundantly said, so there's some opportunities to skinny down. Text-intensive graphics are really difficult on the translation side. Metaphors and idioms end up being speed bumps when it comes to translating, and there are a lot of learning content that's filled with American examples, images, and humor. I know my presentation would never translate, so it's not a very good example to use for a great model of what to develop for translation. And I remember we had a program in our training area called on-track training, and we'd show a train going down the track, but of course there was no parallel in other languages that would have a word that would mean both training on learning content and a train that runs on tracks, and no parallel between training tracks as curriculum and training tracks for the train. There's the malady of process bloat, where there's a lot of unnecessary fiefdoms of content protected by departmental pride and prejudices. Our way is the best. Cumbersome review processes that invite errors because there's not a rigorous version and revision management in place. Cumbersome change processes for updating web content across regional sites. And so a lot of times then you decentralize website management, and marketing comes out with a whole new campaign or new set of content. Regions can lag as much as a year and a half because they don't have dedicated resources to stay in lockstep with corporate. So there has to be better ways to lighten their workload at the same time giving them control of the markets that they know best. There's groups that are wedded to desktop publishing tools across the organization, which wanting to keep to a certain layout, imposing downstream translation desktop publishing efforts that they have to duplicate in language, and those are all costly and slow down the process. And then there are out-of-sync updates that will happen. Either product marketing will update, forget to tell anybody, or there'll be an update in the documentation, but it won't sync with what happens in training. But there's a lot of process bloat and problems. So what I'm thinking of doing is introducing the soon-to-be famous, you could tell me if you believe that, fitness program. And this program has 5 components to it. to strengthen your multilingual muscle with proper terminology. I'm calling it the firm term. Skinny down your content and reduce the waste and optimize the bottom line. And play the balance games and learn to manage centralized brand and locale-specific requirements. Achieve yogic-like postures when designing your body of content, and then outfitting your outfit with a holistic technology approach that will streamline processes and content body bloat. So that's what I'm going to dive into at this moment. Everyone with me and having a beautiful experience so far?
Yeah, this is pretty cute.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So strengthening exercises. Exercise for the firm term. It's what I'm calling it. The nip and tuck exercise is nipping the acronyms and tucking those abbreviations. Staying constantly constant and consistently consistent are all things that are important in terminology. If there's one area where corporations have I think the opportunity to strengthen their multilingual muscles, I would say the first place to start would be in their terminology management. If you looked at abbreviations, which the U.S. is really rich in doing, or defaults to, we like abbreviations in English. We don't want to see big words. We want to abbreviate, but a lot of times these abbreviations are lost on the translators. So you should have a glossary of terms and a reference for all abbreviations if you use them. And they're not always translatable. And there are several languages, Japanese, Chinese, and Arabic, that don't have abbreviations at all. So if you looked at the abbreviation for AAI, which is on the right, those are the characters. Those are those are the abbreviations in the Asian languages there. So
that's abbreviated.
Yeah, that's the abbreviation. If you looked in the on the single byte languages, French, German, and Portuguese, and you looked at accounts payable, you can see one is just in the direct translation how much longer, in this instance, French is. We always hear how long German is. And if you looked at the abbreviation in French, that's as good as it gets. They couldn't get it down any further, so being CF would have no meaning in French, or C/F. So in laying out a screen or in worrying about a graphic that might have that abbreviation, it does not translate very well. You have kind of the same situation in on the word accounts receivable. Some other examples, if you looked at the English business partner, we would say BP and know what that is. The only option you have in French is partenaire. In German, you have this hyphenated abbreviation of this, but it's almost as long as the original, and almost as long in Portuguese. So you in computer-aided manufacturing, in French, it is a combination of 6 words instead of 3, and you can abbreviate it down to 3 parts of words, but you can't get down to a acronym or an abbreviation just of the letters and have any meaning. So these give you at least an idea of the problem that the translator is up against when getting something from the authors that are, not thinking internationally and loading up their content with a lot of abbreviations. And then there are some rules. I thought I actually had a slide there. I might have not included it, but obviously when you're doing an abbreviation, if nothing else, always spell it out the first time and parenthesize it, and then leave plenty of room in your planning that no matter what you end up shortening in your authored English content, expect that it's going to expand, and I don't think exponentially, but at least incrementally as it goes into other languages. Another area in terms of terminology, at least, that is key to company and should just happen on the English side. And I don't know how rampant this is, but I'm surprised to continue to find large multinational companies struggling with what the name of their product is and how they abbreviate it and what they call it. But there should be a strategic effort coming out of product marketing that may be inspired by the TechPubs group to agree on what the product name is, what are you selling, and what is its abbreviation. So like product acronyms, we had asset management and accounts management. They both were AM and very confusing from a translation point of view. Accurately reflecting a product's hierarchy. So a lot of times the website will have a product taxonomy, and that needs to sync with the training taxonomy so that what you sell is what you train and is what you document on, and there is amazingly amount of inconsistency. As you get new VPs of marketing in, they decide to redub products and call them something different, or try to align a product name with kind of a new industry trend, you know, if it's SOA or if it's cloud computing or whatever. They try to mirror what's picking what terms out in the marketplace are falling out of favor, and so everybody's left with that, but it's not always. It's an easy. I mean, it's a where a lot of value can be had just on the English side, so that there's no confusion from the customer's point of view, and then from the translation side, so that it's easier to translate. We ended up databasing product names and syncing them with our item order system and our content system, so that there was like a terminology database that not only included our glossary of terms that we used on the English side and made available on the web, so people would know what our corporate or specific or product-specific jargon was and what we meant by what we called things, but also just on the very fact that whatever was in our item master that the customer, our prospect, ordered synced up with what was in our content system and ended up in the pricing and packaging list. I thought I had a slide here where maybe I decided I just had too much material, but I will at least give you an example of we had something called, in terms of terminology, we had something called a system code, an application code, and a reporting code. And 80% of the time, those terms were used synonymously. So when I said, I'm in the system code accounts payable 04, everybody said, might have said, well, the application code is 04 and the reporting code is 04. Might have thought that. But there was 20% of the time where they were actually meant something different. And what ended up is development would develop to the system code. The marketing would sell at the application code level, and then when the contracts were signed and hatched, they were tied to the reporting code, and they weren't always consistently maintained, and so we had a lot of legal issues that occurred just in our own inability to standardize on a term that meant something corporately and that we all marched to. So that's just, so there's an onus there's benefits if you never translate to standardize on terminology on all sorts of levels. I have some aerobic exercises now that look at, if you talked about trans fat, and I would define that as any content that clogs the translation process and makes it take longer than it ever should take. And one of those clogs on the language treadmill would be Americanisms clog, where we're used to thinking at like a dollar amount or a dollar value. We had programmers putting a dollar sign where you were supposed to put a monetary amount, but of course the dollar sign was inappropriate in Europe. It should have, and a dollar does not mean this is something in different languages, so it would be more appropriate to have a monetary amount. An interesting dilemma is like if you had in your an example of a car, a U.S. car that costs $30,000, and you send that to a translator, are you expecting and are you assuming that they will convert the 30,000? Well, typically a translator who's not told to localize will call it $30,000 yen, or 30,000 euros, or 30,000 marks. But of course, that's not how much the car would cost in that culture, typically. And so there's a loss of credibility in a straight translation of just changing out the units, to yen, without making it something that would be meaningful in that culture. And it might only be 10,000 yen would be what a car of equivalent value would be. So there's some gotchas like that when authored in an Americanism mindset that are not given consideration. Anything that has to do with payroll or HR, taxation, our education system does not correlate. Like we have a high school that goes to 12th grade. Many countries don't have the equivalent. So having examples or metaphors like that, brand names will can either evoke good or bad or not be meaningful. Root beer really is an American item. Baseball is maybe Japanese and American, but there's no equivalent in other countries. So having a home run or getting to first base or hitting it out of the park, none of those have any corollary in other cultures. So you need to, the culturally relevant metaphors are something that needs to be factored in. There are things that are symbols of American culture like Coca-Cola or hot dogs or McDonald's that evoke a negative response in an audience, and so depending on the market and the the political winds of time. So again, wanting to internationalize examples so that the example is something that will be meaningful and inoffensive across the world. And the sports metaphors are ones that are get you into trouble. And demo data, if you are in a situation where you're showing examples, too often the examples that are either being used in training or in the publication is too U.S.-centric and doesn't have a meaning to your audience. Other clogs that I consider trans fat, that are clogging the arteries to your markets, are things that are coined words, are marketing speak. If you looked, we had something that was called the cool bar. Well, the cool bar sounds fun and great for programmer, well, for anybody that we think things are cool, but there's really no corollary for something that is cool in China that would have any relevancy or any meaning. Toolbar would mean something. Cool bar could never go. We made up a term called active era. It sounded really cool. It had some connotation that we were really looking for in English, but in Mexico it was a woman's tampon, a name for a woman, for a tampon. J.D. Edwards 4 was a big, we were doing a big marketing rollout on a new version of our software and had this huge investment all around changing our marketing material and our name and of the new release, and the Japanese office just almost had a cow and said, you cannot roll that out. 4 means death in Japan. We had something, a marketing campaign called Collaborate or Die, and it was when collaboration was like the thing, and it just totally bombed and really backfired on us in Europe because collaboration meant you were in with the Nazis and a collaborator and had really very negative connotations. So having an international review team who can validate a particular marketing campaign or validate that particular images or metaphors can be made relevant in their markets, and that they have the connotation that's consistent with the brand you're wanting to promote is a really effective type of team maybe to assemble and have in place. Things that don't translate well, humor and buzzword clogs, and I have a lot of those in this particular presentation, would be very difficult for a translator to try to make sense of. They're almost, never translatable, and let's see, what is it? Reporting on the fly does not translate well in other countries. Taking something offline, game plan, pushing the envelope, putting something to bed, all of those probably are not ones that would show up in technical pubs per se, except for on the fly maybe, but they would tend to show up in a marketing material and make it very difficult. So these would be clogs or speed bumps. They're not insurmountable, so there may be a reason to keep in colloquialisms, but it should be intentional and strategic and understood that it's going to take the translator longer to find something that is equivalent and would evoke the same essence and ambiance that you're trying to evoke in English. So probably ones that are intuitively obvious, maybe on the trans fat items, is trying to complete, having complete sentences, an implied verb or subject or a complement are very difficult in languages, particularly that are gender oriented. Almost all Latin languages, need to have a gender reference. I mean, the noun has a gender, or at least could have a gender, and they need to know what the noun is. And so, what is the what here, or what is the this here, so that they could get the correct agreement between subject and verb. And then there tends to be in technical publications some gratuitous writing that gets infiltrates in the immature authoring communities, and that that is saying the same thing again and again in a deja vu type of fashion, and this is maybe okay in English, but which I would question, but it becomes a problem in other languages to try to continue. I mean, sometimes it ends up being translated both variations of the same thing are translated in one way, because that's the only way they could be translated, and so you end up having the same sentence twice, as opposed to, at least in English, it would look a little varied. Other trans-fat items are noun strings. These just drive translators very crazy, where you have a multiple set of noun strings. The index, comp, compute, and print report. It's really hard to know what's modifying what and what the object is. A lot of times they aren't hyphenated in a way that makes sense, are not hyphenated as they should be. And it is easier, sometimes it's unavoidable, but it is easier to have prepositions and articles and the report for index computation or something to get out of the juxtaposing noun, modifier, noun, modifier, noun string that is very confusing. If they have to be used, this is again where a terminology, centralized terminology could help explain what the item is, but just sending this to a translator who doesn't really know your space and your domain can spend a lot of cycles trying to unwind what's happening here. Typically, a writer might, on the marketing side as well as on the tech pub side, or even in training, likes to vary the language so that it's more interesting to read and doesn't lull the reader to sleep. And they might use match and reconcile, or spread, distribute, and allocate, amount and quantity, move and transfer, press, hit, and enter, all to vary the language. But what ends up is those have different connotations and different reference points for the translator, and they really struggle. And they want to know, well, did they want to are they intentionally trying to show a more intense way of matching by saying reconcile, or is matching and reconcile the exact same thing? So these, the more consistent the language, the faster the translation. So the other alternative is using the same term to convey different concepts. If you think of the term item, it could be an item in an inventory. It could be an item that appears on a report. An item can be a issue that is being addressed. It's an item, one of the items that we're looking at. And depending on the domain, the translation for an accounts payable item is, that word item is translated differently than an inventory item, which is translated differently than a item, that's an issue. Those are three different words for the same term. So having clarity and using domain-specific terms is faster for a translator, and if it's unavoidable, having domain-specific definitions so that the translator can know the difference between, how that item, what that item means in that context, so that they can get faster to the word that's parallel. Are we still having a beautiful experience?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Everybody can hear me okay?
Doing
Very
fine.
well.
Okay. So if we looked at positions for global posture, there's what I call the expansive position, and just understanding the some of the extremes that can happen if you looked at sword ascending. This is the translation in Finnish, task documentation cross-reference. It's all one word in German, all bumped up against each other. So there's no wrapping here.
Wow.
So it makes it very difficult, if you can imagine. Asian fonts use larger fonts. Asian language use larger fonts, so there's a kind of a vertical expansion too, where you get some overlapping if it's not allowed in the spacing in the line above. If you looked at rule of thumbs of how much space to use, it's maybe counterintuitive, but the smaller number of letters should have the larger percentage allowed. You kind of a rule of thumb I think I always heard was allow 30% expansion, but that doesn't really help in in the sword ascending example. If you just did 30%, it would be maybe 7 more letters that you would allow for, and 7 more letters would cut you off right here. So that's why the smaller the letters or the words, then the larger the space that you need to allow. And this is just an example of where it becomes really problematic for a translator to try to fit anything that's meaningful in a fixed width report or column, table, whatever you want, whatever the issue is. It becomes very problematic, and so what you end up having is the translator not wrestling with the translation of the words, but really trying to fit it, find something that would be meaningful that could fit there. In the Asian languages, sometimes they just give it up and leave it in English, which looks really bad, and they hate. In some languages, in other languages, they'll just kind of Englishize a word just to get around trying to find an equivalent in language. In terms of the graphic position, this is a very friendly graphic, and with the ABC, you can then underneath it have call-outs or have a caption that would describe this flow. Something that's very unfriendly would be a graphic like this, where you have nested or embedded words that are supposed to fit in a box. And if you look at functional requirements, if you remember, if we had to fit sword ascending, and I'm Finnish, and this said sword ascending in it, there would be no way that I could get anything in there that would be meaningful. Cramming more words into a circle because it looks cool. The better design on this would be to have the title of the circle on the outside, and as much as possible have labels externalized and in layers, so that you could just extract the content. The translator could extract the content. Let's say it's an XML, it's an SVG graphic or whatever, translate the text and then just shoot it back in, meaning they don't ever have to open InDesign or the authoring tool for the graphic. They don't have to go into PowerPoint and start futzing with how to make it work. All they're focused on is making sure they have equivalency of words, and you've designed a graphic that can take any size of text back into it and make sense. Not always achievable, but it should be the first line of defense. So a text within a graphic can take 20 minutes to translate, for example, but re-engineering the graphic can take 3 to 4 hours. So typically you'll see a higher cost come in on graphic quotes from a translator in terms of or translation vendor when doing graphics, or when they're forced to go into the graphic tool itself and not only translate but relay it out in the new language. Callouts are problematic if you are trying to fit them next to a graphic and don't allow for expansion. So they are something to be watched, and there's an art, I think, to designing graphics that are internationalized on the English side before they ever get translated. Letters and icons are very cumbersome. They're problematic. A lot of times the letter in the icon is not going to be the same letter in German. For instance, if the icon is print and you put a P in the icon, 90% of the time it's not going to be a P in German, and you certainly know it won't be a P in Japanese. And then trying to fit or put a letter there, like if you think of shortcut keys, and Alt C for copy is not going to mean anything in German because the word for copy is not going to be C. So these are things that need to be understood and factored in. Culturally independent graphic elements are a problem. I have some examples here in the next few slides. And fonts can nab you if you start mixing up a whole mess of them, which I think is just general good design in English, so maybe it doesn't need to be said, but one serif and one sans serif is good enough. These images are not recognized worldwide, so the mailbox this image does not translate. No mailboxes in Europe or in Asia look like this. The binder clip is not a universally used item, where the paper clip is and the letter all mean something. And the only way you're going to, not the only way, there's some work already done in this area that you could leverage, but another way to do it is to leverage your international review team and have them review the images for recognizability and familiarity. Hand signs are really nothing that should be used. They mean different things in different parts of the world and are offensive. So what it might be a thumbs up to us is a good thing is like the middle finger, I think, in Turkey, if I remember right. I might be wrong. I may have that all mixed up. But anyway, you get it that the symbols are not comparable. And then when trying to use a flag to symbol a language, it can be confusing. One, because there's more than one language spoken in a single country, like Switzerland, and then there are countries that all speak English, but the British flag would not particularly be meaningful to an American if they weren't thinking of what that was, so better to spell that out. Just some design warrior positions, I call them. I don't know if how much of you are involved in software documentation. I know the trend or the hope is to always get away from screen captures, but a lot of times they still are indelible to the and necessary to the content. If you can script them in we used to deliver in 8 languages documentation that was 50 guides, and they would be somewhere between 300 to 600 pages, and they probably had a screen or 2 on every page or every other page. And what we did was use a scripting tool that we used in QA to capture, to go through and say inquire here on this, show screen, capture it, and basically use that as a QA in English, and then we would run those, we'd fire up the Japanese, the French, the Chinese software, and they were parallel lives, if you will, and so that same script would then be run against the French. They'd snap the screen and dump it into a directory that then we could import into the French guide. And so instead of taking 2.5 man-years, which is what we calculated, having to script them, throw just a whole bunch of production resources at capturing the screens, we were able to do a guide in within a morning by leveraging scripts. They should be editable, so that at least, not edible, that you wouldn't eat them, but that you could make changes to them. They could be databased and updated through a database is more efficient. Partial screens begin to be problematic. Callouts are problematic. And these are just some standard things about trying to make it easier. And then, of course, the demo data is always problematic if whatever you show has to be aligned. Just some color differences. Notice that red is danger in the U.S. and happiness in China, and death in Egypt, and life in India. So it's hard. Color is, if you're trying to use color to convey either an emotion or associate it with an action, like red to stop or something, you could not be sending the same message in a different culture. Notice that white is purity in U.S. and death in Japan. So it makes it a challenge, I guess. In terms of balancing games, I think this is I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. I think what companies need to be is strategic and factor in that it's a given that countries are going to need to own their destiny and their market and their customers. So they need a mechanism to make sure that what's getting presented to their target audience makes sense, is relevant to the culture, has examples that are meaningful. On the same end of the spectrum, on the other end of the spectrum, corporate cares about that the same brand is evoked, and that core product content and core marketing content is not tampered with, but is inherited. And there's a lot of intelligence as you get into XML, where you might be doing context specific tagging and audience specific and role specific content that you want to be inherited by the country so that they don't have to reinvent those. And yet at the same time, you want them to be able to tweak locally and update centrally. So having a mechanism that they can customize locally and update centrally, I think, is things that corporations need to struggle with and have a plan for. Build in methods so that it can be contextual, and then have a strategy for balancing what the company or corporate wants to control versus what they allow to customize. This can be done in templating on a website where you have events where you want them to customize the list of events to be those that are specific to Brazil, not the ones that are happening in the Bay Area. But then there may be sections in the website template that you just want them to own. It might be the industry of the month or the client of the month or something that you want to be specific to Brazil. But there's core content that you just want them to inherit, that they want to inherit, so that their workload is only focused on those things that will be meaningful to their clientele. So one thing in my picture and that we experimented with and pioneered at J.D. Edwards was authoring in a structured environment with core intelligence baked into the content, meaning screen-specific and field-specific content that we routed through the translations. And then what we did with our customers was make it available for them to leverage our memories that we use to translate our content, as well as, well, that's our customers, but also our regions where they could have access to our core set of content and then be able to localize that and customize it specific to their training needs, for example. So if they had a French training class that they also wanted out to help and wanted to build a help that was baked into the software, they inherited what we had done, customized it, and grouped it that they could have something specific for them that had the intelligence. Just, you know, there's the locale balancing game is that you will oftentimes have a common technical description that is common to all locales. Then you have maybe usage information that's going to vary based on you know, what's in Europe, what's appropriate for U.S. Europe may not be Asian appropriate information. And then, like in this example, nutritional information, how you specify that and the way you lay that out is defined by governmental regulations, and they may be different in each locale. And there's ways of tagging within your XML to have these region or, you know, internationally specific content that is maintained in one set of content, so that you have profiled or applicable content by geography. In terms of taking a enterprise view to content, I always think, well, there's business partners and customers out there. You've got marketing that are doing sell sheets, collateral, white paper solutions. There's customer support that is FAQs, support doc, knowledge docs. You have training that's got job aids, e-learning content, PowerPoints, development documentation, guides, help, test plans, requirements. Ideally, there was a way to centralize that content, or at least have core product content that's shared components, or have that components in centralized places. There's a layer within the organization that has to take that content and repurpose it, either to prospects or to clients, where you're personalizing it to customer support rep that's specific to a particular client or industry, and then training, trying to deliver that content specific to how the customer is doing it. If you were looking at how to staff and manage that at the strategic level, I think that there should be a knowledge officer or a global information officer who really owns the strategy for what happens to this collateral. How important is the sell sheet to Brazil? Do we translate all of this? Do we translate the FAQs? And this person is really the person orchestrating, or at least sharing in a cross-functional team that sets the strategy. You have the knowledge support teams from the authors, the editors, the information architects, the translation services, whether it's being outsourced or in-housed or however it's being managed, some administrative functions for managing the system, and then having ways of seeing how effective the content is, and some of the analytics either based on the website, on usage reports, on what are causing calls, but trying to track the effectiveness and strategic level of the content. So missing that I said up front is a global strategy team who needs to really understand the cost-to-revenue relationship of the market, define a germination period for how long until a market is going to, return its investment, and when do you pull out of a market, who decides what gets translated, internationalized, localized, globalized, there are some reasons to try to step that up and make it a cross-functional team as opposed to done within the departments. And then, really looking at translation spend and at a budget level that can roll up as opposed to having it buried in marketing cost. This team can assign an owner to the process in the highest levels for approval, getting mid-level international management to be bought in on what content is important to their area. So sometimes a technical doc or a technical sell sheet doesn't need to be translated because the intended audience is English. It's given that English is their language for doing business. And then there'll be other types of products or activities that need to be translated at a lower level, but the people who would know that are going to be the international management, the country managers, the customer support VP for the region or whatever, and understanding the market factors. I'm looking at the time, and I realize I put a lot of information together, so I'm going to speed through a little quickly. I'm almost at the end, so don't panic. But there's some metrics that should be captured up front, and that these can be looked at and managed as you're doing the balancing game and understanding what you can do in terms of optimizing. As the team embraces globalization, there's a lot of change management opportunities to get buy-in across the countries. You're going to get pushback from regions who don't want to centralize. You're going to get pushback from departments who don't want to cross-functionalize, and there'll be all sorts of change management opportunities. When you look at the technologies, I feel like that translation should be thought of or built in, designed from the beginning, where you do your content analysis and chunking. What are your topics? What are your reusable components and variables? Up front, identifying terms and reviews as new products come out, managing those through a term manager and your translation memories. I believe that companies, mature, globally fit companies, own their translation memories and centralize them, even if they outsource translations. I believe that a globally fit company would have a linguistic manager by language. So if I'm a German linguist, I would manage the translation memories that are coming back from the vendor. I would manage the term that we would use in German. I would make sure that it maps to what the in-country office thinks and have a term equivalent across language. In content architecting, by databasing or check-in and check-out, version control, and workflow in the content management space, being tied into a translation workflow that allows a customization and manipulation out to the multilingual deliverables. Another way of looking at this is having your repository of topics that can be assembled into a web page out to help, to user guide, learner guide, into courseware that then get managed by different systems, whether it's an ERP system that is managing the help, or a computer system, a learning management system that is managing some of the core learning content, or a portal. And you think about optimizing on technology, certainly XML is giving us an interoperability option to standardize on a standard that everyone can work with, that has potential. There are some that are specific to translation. There's a translation memory exchange, so that if you are not held hostage to a vendor who used Trados or used Star, but that they are kept in an interoperable, or can be exported to TMX. Same thing with TBX, which is a term-based exchange. There's segmentation rules that are being agreed upon internationally, so that what happens in translation memory is that you part up a paragraph into segments, and those segments are matched against what's already been translated in order to determine if something's pre-translated or needs to be translated because there's enough change. There's a GMX that has some metrics exchange and some XML pluses and XML text memory and TBF link namespaces. Oasis has manages the XLIF, which is a XML format for exchanging files from source to translation vendors. And then there's the open lexicon interface format. This is just a little bit about the TBX standard, showing how proprietary term bases can be exported into this exchange format so that you can have kind of a synthesis of terminology and matchup. Similar concept, but with the translation memory, where it's stored in proprietary formats and is moved back in, as well as this is the XLIF, where you can have translation tools that are proprietary, but everything is wrappered. Has wrapper or dialogue, prologue, metadata, if you will, that identifies source, targets, and context in processing. If you looked at XML and term extraction, and I'm just going to have to blow through this, there's just ways that as you identify terms in a TBX format, that can then be mapped back to your data and vice versa here in a fast and easy way, which is an exciting way. So if you looked at getting to a streamlined content body, which is what I've covered here in the 3,000 miles we've traveled, my bias still is that a globally fit to the max entity, one that's leveraging content management for version and workflows, has XML authoring for structuring content, maximizing reuse, and achieving multiple deliveries, has a term base that is centralized, which has one term per concept, has multiple language equivalents for that term. It's controlled and optimizes the translation memory and processes, where you have a centralized translation memory that is normalized by a linguist specialist. So if you have multiple vendors who might be translating the same or similar content, that you have a way of rationalizing different variations between vendors and between translators, leveraging an authoring QA tool to ensure consistency, something that ties audits against your terminology so that you make sure that you're using the current and term as opposed to a deprecated term that you're leveraging against authoring standards, and some level of cross-functional strategy team that's determining market metrics, language and localization strategy, and content direction. So the TMI goal is, once again, to get to quality and brand integrity, decrease time to market, leverage and enhance translation investment, reduce publishing translation costs, reduce the workload, and open new revenue opportunities. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of steps and effort, but it seems as the pressures are on less resources, fewer resources in more markets, that the smarter that companies can get with their global content, the fitter they are, then the more their competitive edge is. Okay. So you have 3 minutes for feedback, or I can go longer.
Can you do that?
Oh, sure.
Well, let's stop the recording and go ahead and answer some questions. Okay. I want to say thank you to Ben Martin from Flatirons for doing such a wonderful presentation today, and to everyone for attending. Ben, I don't know what to say. This was great. Thank you.
Can you keep me on a mailing list if you have more of these presentations?
Sure, I will. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I would really appreciate it.
Great.
Absolutely. You can find this on the web. We are at sfbayptcuser.org. /blog, and we post everything there, but I will send that to you as well.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much. I appreciate
Thanks
the
so
time
much.
you've taken.
Great. Thanks,
You're welcome.
Jen.
Yeah, thanks everybody
Bye.
for your
Janice,
Saturday
too.
morning.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.